I promised myself I wasn't going to get a new driver this year, so I ended up buying this. What's happening, Panda Nation? Peter Von Panda here. I'm sitting here with my new driver. It's so pretty, I love it. I haven't even hit it yet. Just got back from the store with it. Just took off the plastic. Had a sticker right here on the front that said hot. How did they know the buyer was going to be hot? But I just wanted to explain a little bit why I got this driver after I was convinced that I wasn't going to get a driver this year. So first of all, a few new drivers came out for 2022. Ping noticeably did not come out with a new driver. And one of the reasons that I think driver sales should be slowing is that a lot of people bought drivers already in the last couple of years, and really over the last few years, driver technology hasn't really improved. If you watch a lot of the reviews comparing drivers to the previous year or even drivers from 4 or 5 years back, the performance gains are pretty minimal, and that's because there are just some limits to what you can do with the driver. And actually, I was not going to get a driver this year because I was intrigued by the TaylorMade Stealth carbon fiber one, but honestly, it looked like maybe you got a 1 mile per hour ball speed improvements, but you didn't necessarily get more forgiveness. I've had the TaylorMade Sim and the Sim 2 and all the versions of, including the Max, and so I felt like I didn't really need to buy a new driver. But then I was watching and reading a lot about the new Cobras. I really like the Cobras. I feel like Cobra is the most high-tech driver company out there. They are the underdog. They're one of the least respected ones, which is funny because when I was growing up, Cobra was definitely a premium brand. So I don't know, at some point maybe they fell off the map a little bit, but they are certainly back. Are they the best looking drivers ever? I like this because I like gold. I like orange. I think they're kind of cool and modern and striking. Really the only part you see at a dress is this top part, which looks very much like every other club. In fact, to me, it looks very much like the new Rogues with a little bit of gold trim around the back end. I definitely like the flat top here, and as you can see, this little curved edge on the top and the bottom framing this face looks a lot like the TaylorMade Sim and Sim 2 to me. They've actually changed a few things on this club since the Rad Speed and the clubs before that. Now, one of the reasons that I was interested in getting this, one of the drivers that I never showed you was the Cobra Speed Zone driver, and actually it was one of my favorite drivers of all time. I ended up selling it, moving on to the Callaway and then the TaylorMade, and I always regretted getting rid of that Speed Zone because of that Infinity Face. I hit it really well, it looked great, I could play it well, it was pretty consistent for me, and just overall it was an affordable driver that performed as well or better than any of the other drivers I own. In fact, one of the things I thought about was going back to the old Speed Zone driver. If you watch my LTDx irons video, one of the things I thought about was going back to the Speed Zone irons as well. The whole Speed Zone line of clubs to me was a really, really good one. Now, why did I get this, especially over the Rad Speed one? Now, I do want to show you a few things that are unique about this club. First of all, Infinity milled face here. I've always liked the look of this. It kind of looks like glass, which I know is not something that you would want, but it has a very shiny, intentional looking design to it. I've always really liked the Infinity Faces, both on the drivers and on the fairway woods. Now, one of the things they got rid of was the rollover piece here where the Infinity Face would creep up. Now, I will tell you that on the Speed Zone, there was a little bit of gap between the Infinity Face and the body here. And it wasn't a gap front to back, it was kind of a height gap. And it kind of made the club look a little cheap. This is actually a pretty tight fit here, but you can see where the body is just a little bit lower than the edge of the Infinity Face, and it looks like a quality issue. I know it's not a performance issue, but it was just one of those things, especially when you saw the mismatch on the top here, you felt like the driver was a little cobbled together. However, when I would hit it on the top, which I tend to do, sky some balls sometimes, the shots performed a lot better because of that Infinity Face, and I think because of the piece that rolled over the top. So I actually grew to really like it, although I didn't love the way it looked. To me, I would rather have form follow function. I would rather have an ugly driver that just hits bombs than a beautiful driver that I'm spraying off into the woods. So that's a little bit of a change. It makes it look a little more traditional. Hopefully you get most of the performance benefits of this milled Infinity Face. However, I think that there's a little bit of sacrifice here, especially for people who might hit on the top. The other thing that's really interesting here is that this is the unicorn driver, the one that has over 5,000 MOI. It's supposed to be very forgiving. It's supposed to be very fast. If you have a slice, you can get the Max, which is a draw biased version, which you can actually move the weights, swap them out here to make it really draw biased. It's pretty much like the Max version in any of the clubs, whether it was the Callaway, Maverick Max, kind of the same thing. And then the low spin, which is not very forgiving and probably is not good for me. Getting a little bit of extra distance and losing the control is just not the trade-off that I want. So this one seemed to be the one that was in my wheelhouse. Now, I will also say this driver has quite a bit of technology in it. In fact, The way they did the weighting in it, the way they changed the materials here, I think that there are some improvements, particularly in forgiveness over the rad speed. First of all, LTD, longest total distance, means this is a 0 CGNA driver. Isn't that incredible? I'll be honest, I'm not going to be the best to give you the explanation of why CGNA is important. It's center of gravity on the neutral axis, is my understanding. And I guess as I'm reading about it, what I understand it to be is if you were to shoot a line right through the driver here, right in the middle of the sweet spot, what you would find is that the center of gravity on most drivers is a little bit high, a couple millimeters high to several millimeters, to some micro brands that might be 7-8 millimeters high. What that does is it introduces spin, it lessens forgiveness, and so what you want is a driver that has that center of gravity dead smack center. I think it's just supposed to be a performance enhancer, the performance enhancer that I need. Now, most drivers, and I think maybe the Ping is the closest, only has that center of gravity off by 1.5 millimeters. Does that really matter? Well, it probably does. This is a game of millimeters. Will that drastically change your game? I kind of don't think so. But every little piece of tech that can help me perform a little better is a welcome addition here at the Panda Research Institute. So that is supposed to help there. Now, the reason the sticker said hot, and what I found out is that it had nothing to do with me, is that it stands for highly optimized topology, which reminds me a lot of the AI designed faces by Callaway, which means that there are supposed to be more areas here that you can hit, especially off center, that are supposed to give you better performance, more forgiveness. What I kind of think of whenever I see stuff like that is like those steel drums where you have different areas that give different notes. And actually that's really hard to do because when you change one area, it can change the sound in other areas. So I know that with AI, they can run thousands of simulations, maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of simulations, and try to get the best performance that doesn't affect the other areas. So I like that. And what I've seen here is that a lot of people are saying this is the most forgiving driver for off-center hits that people have ever played. So I'm really excited about trying that because I definitely can hit off-center. When I hit on-center on some of my drives, they are fantastic. But when I hit off-center, I can put them into the woods. That's why I've named some of my golf balls Hansel and Gretel. So I'm really kind of curious to see if I can start swinging away and they'll all just go dead center down the fairway. Now, one of the other things that Cobra is using as a selling point for this driver, which actually was not a selling point for me, is the fact that Bryson DeChambeau and Kyle Berkshire helped develop this driver. And one of my issues with this is that when you have really big hitters, really consistent hitters, really good hitters, developing a driver that's good for them is much different than developing a driver that is good for the average Joe. And in fact, if you're making a driver face that can withstand those repeated abusive hits to the center, well, you might not be optimizing that for the average hitter. You may be creating a driver face that's too stiff, that's too firm, that doesn't have the COR or the CT that a lot of us average drivers need. In fact, what we want is springiness in the driver, and if you are building a driver for big hitters, you're probably removing that springiness so that you don't end up out of spec at some point. And so actually, telling me that you are developing a driver with someone who's a huge hitter really doesn't help me much. What I really kind of want to hear is that you've taken a bunch of terrible hitters and you've all turned them into really good hitters. So I was actually a little worried about this, that the driver actually would not be appropriate for 99% of golfers. It's kind of like saying you've developed a suspension that works really good on Formula One cars, and yeah, it's probably great for handling, but if you drive that on the potholed roads of Detroit, you're going to hate it. Just because it's high performance doesn't mean it's good for the rest of us. But what I was saying is that a lot of people, a lot of average golfers, a lot of skilled golfers were saying that this driver is exceptional and maybe the best driver they've ever played with. So I was really intrigued by that. Now, the other thing that really intrigued me is how much press and accolades this driver is getting, considering that the new TaylorMade Stealth has probably been the most hyped and that the Callaway Rogue drivers are often maybe some of the most desirable. So given the fact that two of the biggest brands in the golf industry are maybe being displaced in the news by this driver, actually says that, man, maybe this is really good, because I know Callaway and TaylorMade, they spend a pretty penny. They send out a lot of drivers to a lot of people who are going to say nice things about them. The other thing that intrigued me about this too is its price point. It's not a giveaway driver. I think with tax and everything on it, I paid about $550 for this driver. However, that's actually a bit cheaper, a bill cheaper than some of the Callaway and TaylorMades that I would be looking at too. So it could be the best performing driver, it could be the most advanced driver, and it could be one of the cheaper drivers that you can buy in the big OEM space. Now, what I want to do here is take this to the simulator. I've not even hit this, and you might be saying, Pete, why would you buy a driver that you haven't even gone and tested yet? And that's just because I'm dumb. So there's your answer. But if any of these LTDx drivers are going to fit me, this is probably the one. Now, I'll gone ahead and put it on my fitted shaft here. This is an Airspeeder 40 in regular flex, and I did buy this Autoflex SF405 shaft. So I'm going to go ahead and build this to be exactly like this, and then we will go ahead and try this driver and see if it makes any difference. So let's get building, let's get hitting. All right, so I spent some time in the practice bay with the GC2, and as I was warming up, I was actually able to hit some pretty decent shots, just around 200 yards, but while I was getting loose, they all seemed to kind of fly that far, and then I started taking some liberties, getting used to the Airspeeder shaft, which is not a shaft that I play anymore because I usually play the Autoflex shaft, so it was a little bit different to play one of the regular graphite shafts. Now, I will say this. The driver is very forgiving, and I'm glad I didn't go with the max, which is draw bias, because I was pulling everything left. That's just kind of my typical shot shape, and so I actually saw that the driver sits very square, which I like, but I actually was starting to open it up a little bit to straighten it out. Now, I was shocked at how much distance I was getting, and as I started to really swing away at it, which is where the shots would really start getting out of control, they were still very controllable. So they were starting to reach out 10, 15, 20 yards farther. So that gave me more confidence to continue to swing away at it. Even on this mishit, which would probably be a duck hook with my other drivers, the distance here was about 215 yards on my mishit, which is pretty amazing. Now, one of the things that I also noticed here is that my launch angle was much higher than I wanted. I bought this driver with 10.5 degrees, and I was lofting it up an additional degree and making it draw biased. And so what I really wanted to do was actually take off a degree, get it back down to 10.5 and a neutral lie angle. And the reason was, even though I was averaging a launch angle of 17.6 degrees, which is maybe just a smidge more than I would like, on my shorter shots, I was noticing that I was getting launch angles of 18 or 19 degrees, which is much higher than I would like. That was also being reflected on my descent angle, averaging 40.8 degrees, and some of those were even a little steeper, which meant I wasn't getting the rollout and the additional distance for better total distances that I could have. Of course, though, as I was about to make these changes, I realized that I had forgotten to bring my adjustment wrench, so I was stuck with the driver that I had, which means I had to keep hitting the driver, although I was starting to stretch it out even a little bit more in its less than ideal loft and lie setup. And I also wasn't able to swap in my Autoflex shaft. I really wanted to do that because as I kept hitting the ball, I was actually starting to get drives that were consistently falling between 230 and 247 yards. So I was really impressed with this driver head. It is definitely the straightest and longest driver that I have currently in my arsenal. So as I continue to hit it, I think I am wrong about having Bryson be part of the development team on this driver, because obviously this driver is working. And two, that CGNA, the center of gravity on the neutral axis, absolutely does something, or at least it makes me think I'm doing something, because the drives just got longer and longer the more I played with it. A couple of things that I want to change on my next trip is use a different tee, maybe the smaller tees as opposed to the bigger driving range tees that they had, and then also bring some premium golf balls. So I might bring some Pro V1s, because all they had were these used old balls, Pinnacle, and this one I think says Callaway on it, but they have been heavily used before, and so I wonder if a premium ball might give me a few more miles per hour. Now, the other thing that I think is very exciting about this is that if I can get in that Autoflex shaft and get that dialed in and find that it works with the LTDx driver head, and use a premium ball that might be able to get me another mile or two per hour in ball speed, I am hopeful that as I was able to see 244 to 245 yard drives in its stock configuration, that I might be able to add on another 15 or maybe 20 additional yards, which would be the farthest drives that I would have ever played in my life. So if I could get out to 255 to 260 yards total, then those would be the best drives I have ever made. And the other thing I want to note here is this is all USGA conforming. So I have had drives that have been 260 to 270 yards, but that was generally with my crank, Formula 11, double X, super high core driver on an autoflex shaft with a premium ball. So the idea for me to be able to get to maybe 260 yards with a conforming driver where I've only been able to do it with a non-conforming driver would be awesome. So as of right now, this Cobra LTDx driver is the most promising and the most exciting driver that I have ever played. I am super stoked about trying it this season. And if it performs even 90% as well as it did in the simulator, I should have my best season ever. I tell you what, if you want to pick one up and see if it improves your golf game so that you can live a little happier, I'll put a link to it in the description below. Peter Von Panda, out.
We can discover more and explore so much deeper. We can live better than ever thanks to Peter. Peter Von Panda. Peter Von Panda.
When it's through. Faithful twist the both of you. So come on, baby, come on over. Let me be the one to show you. I'm the one who wants to be with you. Deep inside, I hope you feel it too.
In fact, if you were making a driver's... No, I cannot speak.